Consumed by David Cronenberg, a foray into the literary world by a quite renowned film director. So, David Cronenberg, I'm sure likely needs no introduction. Very famed director of films. You may have encountered his work if you have seen such movies as Scanners, The Dead Zone, The Fly, Crash, and not that crappy movie Crash from the mid 2000s, and A History of Violence. The dude has made some pretty acclaimed films. But, and I didn't know this until I just happened to come across this book in a Goodwill by accident, he is also apparently a novelist, having written this book, Consumed. Now, the question is, though, does this book measure up against his generally pretty acclaimed filmography? Well, having read it, I can say with great confidence, not just no, but hell no. Consumed is probably, by a pretty good margin, the worst book, the worst fictional book at least, that I have read so far this year. This book was ass. This book was absolute ass. I thought it sucked. And apparently, I'm not the only one who thought that, because I looked it up on the internet because I wanted to see what some other opinions of the book were, because I hadn't really heard of it until, again, I saw it in a Goodwill. And on Goodreads, it holds, I think, at present, a rating of like 3.15, which is a very low rating. And it more than earns it because, like I say, this book is absolute ass. And I'm going to tell you why that is. So, what is the story of Consumed? Well, this book is, to an extent, definitely in Cronenberg's style of like body horror. It has elements of body horror to its narrative, but it concerns this couple of journalists named Nathan and Naomi, and also the apparent murder and cannibalization of this woman named Celestine Arastagai, who is one half of a French philosopher couple, which I think is like kind of in the vein of like Sartre and Beauvoir. Celestine and Aristide Arastagai. What a name. And it would appear that Aristide Arastagai murdered his wife Celestine and ate her and then went on the lam. And so Naomi is trying to research this story and get to the bottom of it, and make some contacts in France to see if she can't track down the fugitive Aristide Arastagai. Meanwhile, her significant other, Nathan, is in Hungary reporting on a medical procedure when he sleeps with the patient of that procedure and apparently contracts some type of gnarly STD, fictional STD, I think, called Roif's disease. And for whatever reason, he decides that after he learns he has contracted this disease, he wants to meet with the doctor who discovered this STD back in like the 60s or something. So he goes to Canada to meet Dr. Roif, who discovered this STD, and he ends up like staying with this doctor and like collaborating with him. And the doctor has a daughter named Chase who has some type of mental condition where she goes into like fugue states and like eats part of herself. Like it's definitely in that Cronenberg body horror style. But then it turns out there is a connection between the doctor's daughter and the Arastagais from France, the philosophers, and so these narratives are linked. But then it turns out that Celestine Arastagai might not be dead after all and may have defected to North Korea. And it turns out there may be this kind of international conspiracy involving North Korea and hearing aids. It's kind of a weird book, actually. And then some stuff happens, and then it ends very abruptly. I will say that it ends very abruptly, and that's the best that I can give in way of an overview of this book, I think. So let's talk about the technical qualities of the book. The writing is pretty much the only thing about this book that I can praise. I have to say, having read another book by a film director in the past, that being Quentin Tarantino's novelization of his own film Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, I found this book to be written in kind of a amateurish style. Of course, that may have been my design, but the writing in Tarantino's novelization of his film Once Upon a Time in Hollywood was pretty like it's not very what you'd call like literary by a long shot. It's written kind of in a simplistic style, but I was surprised to find that Consumed is actually written in a fairly strong manner. Now, I don't know if Cronenberg actually like wrote this book or if he used like a ghostwriter, if he just like had the story and then he used somebody with like, prose writing skills to actually tabulate the story. I don't know, but the book is written decently, if not more than decently. It's not probably going to knock your socks off in terms of the prose. Like, it's not the most artful or eloquent that you'll ever read, but it's definitely competent. It's a very competently written book. So I don't really have anything to complain about with the writing. The writing is good. And that's about the only thing about this book that I can say is good. So let's move on to the characters now. These characters sucked like hard. I didn't care about any of the characters. Actually, I felt decided antipathy towards most of these characters over the course of this book. Naomi and Nathan, the main couple, the journalist couple, I didn't care about them. I found them very shallow. They had very little depth. They weren't very well rendered. I knew virtually nothing about them. They were very, again, shallow in terms of their rendering. I did not care. And then, of course, we have Aristide Arastagai, the potentially murderous cannibal philosopher, who, again, I think is kind of like modeled after Jean-Paul Sartre. French intellectual with a rapacious libido, that kind of thing. Degenerate in some ways. Yeah, and I actively hated that character. And I don't know, because again, this book it's kind of ambiguous. I think what happens at the end, he either his hearing aids explode and kill him, or that's some kind of ruse so that he can also defect to North Korea along with presumably his wife. I don't know, because it ends so abruptly and it's kind of up in the air with it. But I was hoping that like his hearing aids exploded and killed him, because I really wanted the character to die by the end of this book. I hated these characters mostly, and of course Nathan, Naomi's significant other, like just sleeps with the patient whose surgery he is documenting in the beginning, which seems wildly unprofessional to me. And of course, he contracts this STD and then gives it to his, I guess, girlfriend, Naomi. And like, I did not care for any of these characters. In fact, once more, I felt decided antipathy towards most of them by the time this book wrapped up. So yeah, the characters suck, in my opinion. Now on to the actual story itself. There was some promise, I will say, in the beginning of this book. The setup was intriguing enough that it kind of drew me in, but it never comes to anything. And what this felt like, beyond just an exercise in kind of fairly typical Cronenbergian body horror, it felt like an attempt to emulate some work of Thomas Pynchon. Like, as the book goes on, there is kind of revealed this international conspiracy involving North Korea and potentially explosive hearing aids. Again, it's kind of odd, really. But anyway, there's this kind of nebulous conspiracy, and it felt very Pynchon-esque, but it felt like bad Pynchon. And that's not to say that I necessarily think there's any good Pynchon, because I don't like the books of Thomas Pynchon, or at least the books of his that I have read. But this felt like a watered down um, version of what Pynchon tries to do with his books, and it was not very compelling by the end of the book. And like it never comes to anything. Like, Cronenberg's films are by and large pretty horrifying, because of just the gnarliness of the visuals. Like The Fly, or scanners with the heads exploding. Right. It's I think that his style is more suited to film where you actually get these visuals, because honestly, I just found this book painfully boring after a time. After the initial intrigue had worn off, it just became the most tedious read, because even the elements of body horror that you get, like, well, I guess if you want to count a kind of gnarly STD in there, but also you get the girl who like pulls off pieces of her skin and eats, and then of course you have the whole cannibalism thing, which actually may not have even happened because it was just part of the conspiracy. It just does it really wasn't that it really wasn't that engrossing, honestly. I was never horrified. I was never appalled in a good way. I was appalled by how poor this book was, but I was not appalled in the body horror sense of the word, like you would expect to be from a Cronenberg tale, right? I just found this book just, again, just kind of painful to read, and again, it ends so abruptly. It honestly kind of just felt like it cut off, really, and yeah, it was just it was just a bad book. It really was. This is a bad book. Cronenberg, you should have stuck to film, because this book sucks. So to rate Consumed by David Cronenberg, I'm going to give this book a D minus. I think that's probably one of the lowest ratings I've ever given a book, but I think this book earns it. The only reason why it doesn't get a full F rating is because the writing is admittedly decent, if not a little bit more than decent at times. But other than that, this book has absolutely nothing to recommend it. The characters are flat and very unlikable. And the story, while it is initially kind of interesting, it quickly becomes just tedious, painful, boring, and once more, it feels like it's trying to do some kind of Pynchon-esque conspiracy stuff, but it just doesn't really come out. It just falls flat, I think. So yeah, I'm giving Consumed by David Cronenberg a D minus. I think this book was crap. I would not recommend it. But yeah, if you have read Consumed out there, let me know down in the comments what you thought about it, whether you have agreed or disagreed with anything that I've said about it here today. And if you haven't read Consumed, once more, don't. I think this book is not worth the money. I paid $1.99 for this copy, and I still think that was too much, because it sucked so hard. So yeah, I would not recommend it. But as always, if you have enjoyed anything you've seen or heard here today, remember to hit that like button and subscribe. I would really appreciate it. And until next time, peace.